Welcome back, everybody. It's another episode of the Decline and Fall Show, and today we ask the very important question: what does it take to be an intellectual, if other ruling class in this period of decline, fall, decay, stagnation, collapse? What does it take? Does it take perhaps a man or indeed a woman of high intelligence, high integrity, somebody who's prepared to do the hard task of the thinking that the politicians are incapable of doing, somebody who's prepared to go into cabinet meetings and committees and present the cold, unvarnished, horrendous reality of things like the Ukraine war, the Gaza war, or the situation in Iraq. Someone who's prepared to tackle the big issues regarding the diminishing share of world trade of the imperialist bloc, the ever-diminishing military power, the fact that they're not taken particularly seriously by large areas of the world. Is it somebody who's going to wrestle with those problems? The answer, of course, is no. The real way you get into the hierarchy of the think tank world in the imperial core nations, the rotting imperial core nations, is to be the kind of miserable arse-kissing merchant who can go into a meeting with a bunch of utterly moronic MPs or cabinet ministers or senators and tell them the exact thing that they want to hear at any given moment in time, which is that Hamas has already been defeated, Russia has lost the war at least 8 times, the Challenger tank on its own will defeat the entirety of the Russian military, and that Iran will fall via a concerted assassination campaign or the next color revolution. Trust us, guys, we've got this right before. Turns out the one quality you need in an imperial courtier these days is, of course, just as it was in the feudal period, a good old-fashioned sense of groveling and the willingness to do it in an unrestrained fashion in front of those in power. Kit Clarenberg over there in the once and future socialist Yugoslavia, how do you see the foul denizens of the think tank world?
Well, I mean, number one, there is an element of I think we're in the wrong game, aren't we? Because I mean, these people are paid just astonishing amounts of money for offering up consistently, but the worst takes on everything, much to our detriment, as average people. But at least we can sleep at night. So there is that aspect to it, and I think that. This has been something I've been wanting to say for a while now. I'm always, I mean, we both, Alex and I, I'm sure he doesn't mind me speaking on his behalf. We are humbled, honored, and awed by the positive feedback that Decline and Fall has generated. A very common comment that we receive is, well, we managed to make light out of darkness and bring humor out of very serious and often very depressing topics. I think that the overall theme of today is, yes, comedy and farce, because I mean, this is just it's getting to the point now where, as kind of almost immune and numbed to just the stupidity and the imbecility and the ineptitude and the incompetence and other negative words beginning with I. That comprise our ruling elites and the people who make decisions affecting us. I still am surprised at just their total lack of shame, their complete and utter impotence. That's another word beginning with I, which I neglected to mention. But it's just like, it's the same thing, keeps happening over and over and over again. And you know, what was it Elvis Costello said? History repeats the same deceits. The glib replies, the same conceits. Yes, it's it's getting to the point now where it's like our broadcasts almost write themselves, because what's just happened a week ago has happened again. But and it's just like, how have lessons not been learned? I like from any of this stuff. And I mean, bear in mind that I gather from, I've been told by some people that they've been unsubscribed from us on YouTube and Substack. So obviously what we're doing is being looked at. An ability to learn from your mistakes, the powers that be, is just to watch our show and not do what we called you out for doing, but you keep doing it. So we're going to keep at it in the meantime. But yeah, if you'd like to kick off, Alex.
Well, just to say, if it's Paul Mason watching, and Paul, we know you do, possibly whilst in the middle of a frenzy triggered by certain under-the-counter illicit medications. Paul, you're always welcome on the show. Come on, let's talk it out. Anyway, moving on to other foul creatures of the think tank world, we come, of course, to the thing known as the Institute for the Study of War, probably populated mostly by people who've never seen a war and feel much better for never having done so. Now, recently, there has been, if you look at even pro-NATO and pro-Banderite military summary channels on YouTube, as everyone has acknowledged, they are a rapidly speeding up Russian advance into previously held Ukrainian territory, including creating several cauldrons in the Donetsk area, encircling the strategically important town of Pokrovsk, advancing back into the Kherson city region, which they, of course, evacuated back in late 2022. And there is a manpower crisis, which, again, even Ukrainian commentators have admitted to. And the fact that the Russians have severed major transport arteries in Ukraine now. But there is a power generation, or should we say a power distribution crisis in Ukraine, thanks to the Russians hitting the substations and the ways in which the energy is relayed through the network. Kiev itself suffering from major prolonged blackouts and energy shortfalls, really for the first time in the war. And all of this creates a picture of imminent crisis, which various imperialist powers are responding to in different ways. We'll get to more of that later. But fear not, because if you're the kind of person who likes comforting stories, then the Institute for the Study of War is here for you. It's shorter than the Reader's Digest and contains a happier ending than most Mills and Boon novels. Ask your granddad if you don't get the reference. So, Kit, what the hell are the Institute for the Study of War playing at, and what do they possibly hope to achieve by posting, as you can see, dear viewers, on the screen share here, such ludicrously concocted tales such as, well, it's actually the Russians that are in Crimea?
Yeah, well, I mean, ISW are an endless resource if you want a really good laugh. And it's like yeah, I mean, there's that famous line about how if you give enough monkeys enough typewriters and enough time, they'll come out with the works of Shakespeare. It's like, this is the stuff that gets left on the cutting room floor, and it's like they've drafted in a bunch of people of extremely low intelligence and extremely high levels of intellectual dishonesty, if you could even call it intellectual, and they are given the task of come up with the most ludicrous explanation you can for why reality isn't reality, and why, despite all of the evidence of your eyes and ears, Russia is still losing this, it's all and any wins are illusory. They have a consistent track record of coming out with some of the most extraordinary stuff, which again you would think that even the most shameless CIA and MI6 propagandists would think this is too ridiculous even for us. So their latest installment in their never-ending history of just coming out with this it's stultifying takes on the proxy war, and we can get into some of their other greatest hits in due course. They state Russian forces have been conducting infiltration missions and raising Russian flags in areas of the front line in eastern Ukraine as part of a concerted effort to claim that these infiltration missions are actually enduring Russian territorial gains. Okay, so the implication here is Russia, because they really, really care about what people in the West think about their war progress, are braving drone strikes, sniper fire, and breaching the front line at enormous risk to themselves to take selfies with Russian flags to falsely claim they've taken territory when they actually haven't. And this is, again, it's not the first time that the ISW have, I believe that they are somehow tied in with Victoria Newland. I'm not sure what the linkage is there, but
it's the Kagan family connection.
Yeah.
I believe it one of the Kagans is in a senior position there. Newland is married to Robert Kagan, and of course his brother is Fred Kagan, and his wife is also involved in like various different think tanks. So it's the Washington think tank world is a very tightly knit community of assholes, basically.
Yeah, indeed, indeed, and I might add as well that that Robert Kagan was he was the founder of the notorious Project for a New American Century, which was the effectively the brains, quote unquote, behind the Bush administration's war on terror several years in advance. And yes, he's married to Victoria Nuland, who was the State Department point person on Ukraine during the Maidan coup, was handing out motivational cookies to protesters in Maidan Square, and then handpicked Yankovic, replacement interim government for the fascists. But that's a discussion for another day. The point is, yeah, the ISW, they have a history of doing this, of trying to somehow frame Russian advances as, like a trick, a magic trick. And this is just like really quite extraordinary. And it's like, and there's, you got to bear in mind as well that like the to ISW's minimal credit, they do admit that there are quote unquote porous areas of the front line in Ukraine. That is an understatement to say the least. And I have seen Ukrainian soldiers posting on Telegram about how we have one soldier to cover many kilometers of front line at this stage. Okay, so even though the front line and many kilometers surrounding it are extremely dangerous, to the extent that the Russians, even if they were these stupid lumbering ogres that we've been told they are, and they really aren't, that even if they were that, they wouldn't risk their lives just to take a selfie to give the impression that they're advancing. The reality is they're advancing everywhere, and the key areas they're advancing currently are key transportation hubs. They are basically fortresses that Ukraine has built up since 2014 in preparation for war with Russia, which was always the point. It's what the West wanted to get out of Maidan. This was Alexei Arestovich, Zelensky's former right-hand man, said on many occasions, war with Russia is our price for joining NATO and the EU. The Russians are about to swoop on 6 or 7 key major urban centers, and then it's all flatland from there to Kiev. So, of course, in this context, it is necessary for the few remaining Ukrainian ultras, and indeed organizations like ISW, who are paid to lie in service of keeping this going, that actually, this is all fakery. It's all just deception, and nothing's actually happening. The Ukrainians are holding the line. But no, I think we're on the verge of some major, and we have been saying this for quite a while, but I think we are on the verge of some major, breakout advances. And the fact of the matter is that even Ukrainian fighters themselves and Ukrainian supporters, the more honest ones, as if that's a realistic concept, admit that Ukraine is suffering very severe manpower shortages and can't maintain the front line anymore. I guess at this stage, all that their side can offer is kind of mental gymnastics to try and rationalize the inevitably looming defeat. I'm sure if it comes to it, that they will, the ISW will say, Russia has occupied Odessa and Kharkov to give the impression that they have occupied Odessa and Kharkov. And that's not an exaggeration. They've literally made this argument before in trying to rationalize Russian success and Ukrainian failure.
Well, as a great club-footed genius once said, we are tactically withdrawing from the Soviet advance, destroying them as we would withdraw to a great and heroic defense of the German Reich. I'll leave it to the audience's imagination to guess who the certain dwarfish individual was who came out with those statements in 1944 to 45. Similar energy on display here, and we'll come to the rapidly imploding military picture in just a moment. But there is, of course, some good news coming from the Ukrainian side in this war, because as one, if you're as old as I am, might remember, do something I remember from is in being talked about in celebratory tone, the program known as John Craven's News Round back in the day. Those of you of a certain age will remember that one. Was the opening of the first McDonald's in Red Square, graced by such presences as probably Mikhail Gorbachev himself, though he was known to prefer Pizza Hut. So the symbol of McDonald's is, of course, something which is inevitably bound up with the period known as globalization. The prophet of globalization, the great man himself, Thomas Friedman, once declared that you couldn't have McDonald's without McDonnell Douglas, and also posited the genius theory that no two countries who had McDonald's franchises had ever gone to war. This, of course, along with many other assumptions, fell apart during the war against Yugoslavia, because, correct me if I'm wrong, Kit, but by 1999 there was a McDonald's in Belgrade. So, but the McDonald's remains a symbol of the lost world of globalization. And so here on the Twitter of the president of the American Chamber of Commerce in Ukraine, we have a celebration opened in Kiev. We'll just share this with you right now, dear viewers and listeners.
So even as the much of Kiev here today is without electricity, the positive news is here. We're here at the Kiev Zoo. Why we're here? Because today this is what's happening. If you look over here, today we have the opening, a brand new opening, a time even when there's not much electricity in the city, but there's a place that has constant electricity. McDonald's is opening its 50th restaurant here in Kiev. I'm loving it. This is the place where families come together, especially when there's no electricity in Kiev, all coming together. Stay tuned and let's go to the new McDonald's in Kiev at the zoo.
Can I just... Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I hope you all caught that, good listeners. The president of the American Chamber of Commerce in Kiev saying, hell, the rest of the city's got fuck all electricity, but we've always got some in McDonald's. So huddle around your Big Macs for warmth, Kit.
Yes, indeed, and I might add, just to like really, number one, Andy Hunder, is he's British, so it's interesting that he's leading the American Chamber of Commerce in Ukraine, representing hundreds of US and international investors in Kiev, who are likely going to get burned very badly in the near future. But anyway, he is a former TV presenter, and he also he worked in Ukrainian TV for many years. Interestingly, this accompanying post, the text accompanying this cringeworthy video is somehow even more toe-curling in its total lack of awareness. Yes, it's cringe factor. So he says, even on a day when much of Kiev is without electricity, there's light and optimism in McDonald's 50th restaurant in Kiev, running on a generator. Opening a new restaurant during a war is more than a business decision. It's a statement of resilience, hope, and community. No, I think it's just enormously depressing that this is what Ukraine has been reduced to. And I'm kind of reminded of Four Lions, that we, if you didn't catch our review of Four Lions, by the way, that you should check it out, where one of the terrorists in Four Lions specifically says that Westerners worship at the Church of McDonald's. And yes, this seems to be the direction of travel for Ukraine as well, because we have seen Azov fighters buried with McDonald's Happy Meals. This is an actual thing that's happened, and it's like, well, even if people are going to probably die of cold if they can't escape Ukraine due to the total lack of power, you can always get some god awful, terrible food made by one of like the most evil corporations in the world, and get warmth that way. It's run on a generator. Demonstrate your commitment to a sovereign, democratic, liberal, progressive Ukraine by choking to death on chicken nuggets which contain 1% chicken. This is where Ukraine is headed, and for it was written. Sorry.
Yeah, it was. I want to know how many Pizza Huts there are, because that's Gorbachev's legacy right there. And this really is a sort of end of the affair, really. I mean, as I said, that McDonald's personifies globalization, the American-led globalization of the 90s and the 2000s. And the fact that Kiev has fucking 50 McDonald's in it. I mean, I live in Glasgow. As far as I'm aware, there's not that many here. Nor was there that many in Manchester or even Birmingham when I lived there. Like, so that it's got fucking 50 just tells you what value McDonald's bizarrely came to have for American imperialism. It is, or was anyway, a symbol of their success. They could sell to you food that consists basically of chemicals and plastic and various things that are barely digestible. And don't get me wrong, in a drunken state, I have eaten it in the past. But again, it could barely meet the description of food. I knew somebody once who left like a half a Big Mac in a plant pot accidentally after a drunken frenzy. And it stayed there, the burger stayed there for half a year, didn't go moldy. What the hell is in that thing? Nothing organic, it would seem. The point is that they turned this is a triumph of propaganda over reality, because materially speaking, the food is awful. But the image created of it, of wealth, of success, of, as Mr. Hunter says, he's loving it. Oh, judging from his accent, I would say it's very rare that he would ever grace a McDonald's with his presence. It's like when Anthony Blinken sat down for a delicious McDonald's meal in Kiev a while ago and just looked as if he was in hell. It's like you could see the thoughts going through his head. It's like, my God, where's the silver service? What is this? Is this what these people eat? But it is a triumph of the image over the reality, just as the triumph of the West in the Cold War was a triumph not of actual material strength as such, so there was a degree of that, but an image that was sold to a certain number of the people in the old socialist bloc and the people's democracies that they wanted to get access to. The reality of it is wage slaves sweating away in a McDonald's in Kiev for a few hryvnia an hour to deliver some polystyrene, probably to a bunch of NGO workers, more than likely, and like Ukrainian elites who still just about cling on to the idea that it's cool to be seen there. But there you go. Thus is the legacy of the 1990s. Kit, did you have anything else on that before we?
Well, yeah, I think 2 points to make there, from my perspective, which is number one, it's important to note that McDonald's workers are exempt from the draft. So it's not going to be so. Of course, roles at McDonald's are in high demand despite the low pay and terrible working conditions, because you're not going to get scooped up by a conscription ban if you can flash your McDonald's membership card. Of course, this does not apply to the Deliveroo drivers who have to deliver this crap to NGO workers, the US Embassy, Trump if he's visiting. The draft order it doesn't apply to McDonald's workers, but it does apply to the poor fuckers who have to deliver this stuff to NGO workers and the US Embassy and whatever non recruitable population is left in Ukraine. The numbers are questionable, to say the least. I think that it's interesting, as you say, that McDonald's is still being held up as this kind of emblem of Western superiority and triumph, because of course the queues in China and Moscow when McDonald's finally opened there, that that was a massive propaganda victory for the West. And it's like, well, now we've been reduced to a McDonald's being run on a generator, like in a zoo, which is, yes, probably full of plainclothes military recruiters who are going to snatch any males staring at whatever animals they have in that zoo. I'm not sure what they've got on offer, but it's highly symbolic, I think, of where Ukraine is headed under the present regime. Which again might not last very much longer. It might not last as long as that dumped Big Mac you mentioned.
Of course, leads us to a wider discussion of the Ukraine war beyond the ludicrousness of the Institute of the Study of War and the propaganda of the desperate residents of the green zone in Kiev. It is, of course, as we said earlier, indicative of the generalized crisis on the front lines, that there is a new scramble for some kind of strategy to stop this. Now, there are multiple different plans in the works in the West, some of which are American, some of which are British, some of which are Franco-German, all of which won't work, to try and preserve the Kiev regime. I mean, I think that's the guiding principles behind certainly the activities of the British and the French and the Germans, to try and make sure that the current government, or some version of it, retains power, and that NATO retains the ability to project itself into Ukraine. This is behind, ultimately, the talk, the several different talking points coming out of Washington, London, and Brussels now. One is the talk of the provision of the Tomahawk missile system, cruise missile system, to Ukraine, about which more in just a moment. The other is about seizing Russian assets and/or putting more sanctions on Russian oil, trying to prevent India buying Russian oil, about which even Narendra Modi, fuck off, basically. He's not going to sacrifice the profits of the Indian oil industry to please the American president. The other is this renewed talk from Trump and others of an immediate ceasefire, which was again demanded under the terms of the so-called Kellogg plan. When Trump and Putin met in Alaska, Trump appeared to recognize the fact that the Russians would not accept a ceasefire before an agreement had been reached. And then Trump got taken back to Washington, got a whole new bunch of people speaking in his ear, including some people who probably write for the Institute for the Study of War, and then come out the other end and said, we need a ceasefire. Again, what that does essentially is it guarantees that there won't be one, because as Sir Keir, he, a frequenter, allegedly, of the services of male models and digital ID card fan, his plan, as outlined by Secretary of Defense of perfidious Albion John Healey the other day, is to insert the so-called coalition of the willing into Ukraine the moment that there is a ceasefire. So the moment that the Russians agree to stop their military operation, that force will be put in there, and Ukraine will be essentially formerly NATO-occupied territory. That is the plan, which is exactly why the Russians will never agree to this ceasefire. And it's why we're back on this merry-go-round of wonder what the latest Wunderwaffen will be, and what impact will it have. I'll just conclude on this point. Previously, all of the wonder weapons given to Ukraine, HIMARS, ATACMS missiles, Scalp, Storm Shadow missiles, Leopard tanks and Challenger tanks, to name but 6, have all been met with this absolute flurry of hysteria from the think tank world about this is the game changer. The Russians can't possibly counteract HIMARS. The Russians can't possibly stop a Storm Shadow missile. The Russians can't possibly destroy a Leopard tank or a Challenger tank. All wrong. The Russians have counteracted and destroyed all of them. And now, apparently, they can shoot down Patriot air defense missiles as they're flying through the air to clear the path for their own missiles. So nothing innovates like a war, it seems. But having been consistently wrong about all of that, they're now insistent that Tomahawks must be given to Ukraine, which is just, again, it is a PR move. Even if Ukraine got them, they would be counteracted and the launching systems destroyed by the Russians in a few months. But Kit, I'll throw to you now for your analysis of the Tomahawk situation and what it says about the general, I would say, desperation in the West.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, it's difficult to know where to start with this because, as you say, every single game-changing Wunderwaffe that has been committed so far, to the extent that they've ever worked at all, it's been a few weeks, and then the Russians find some way of countering it or offsetting it, whether that's via electronic warfare or via moving their forces or command structures to different or missile launch sites to different areas which can't be hit by these weapons. But there's the Tomahawk fiasco or saga is particularly interesting to me because I mean this is talk about this has been percolating for like a very, 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 very long time. Okay, and there's been a lot of calls for the US to release the Tomahawks, and then a few weeks back we had Zelensky say, "Well, we might get the Tomahawks." Then this was offset by the US saying, "Well, we're not sure if we're going to send them," and then now apparently this is back on. Now, leaving aside any consideration of the fact that even if the Ukrainians are successful in using the Tomahawks for any length of time, A, they will be offset. B, Putin has made very clear that it would be a very serious escalation just on principle to send them, let alone shoot them off. As I have written about, and I think as we've discussed on this show more than once, there are very serious issues around procurement with the Tomahawk. So during the Trump administration's failed renewed war on Yemen at the start of this year, the US blew through hundreds of Tomahawks, which they cost $2 million a piece. A, it achieved absolutely nothing. B, the cost and time and resources it's going to take to replenish what was burned through in 30 days against Ansarallah, it's going to take years. Right. So, and you can find mainstream media articles where it is openly discussed. The US Navy has a very serious Tomahawk shortage. So, this strategy of equipping Kiev with scarce Tomahawks would require the US not only not selling these missiles to anyone else, which seems rather doubtful. It would mean just completely stripping themselves of all of their remaining stockpiles, which are already threadbare. So it's just a completely insane, completely idiotic strategy, which might generate some headlines for a bit. Even the promise of sending them might, as we're seeing, there's a lot of excitement around it, but it's not going to amount to anything. And I think there are two other examples of this. I mean, there are the Leopard tanks. There was a Challenger tank. We were told we're going to sweep the Putin's conscripts away. Got whomped within hours of deployment during the 2023 counteroffensive. There are. There are very clear precedents for failure like this. Number one is the fact that we were told not that long ago that Ukraine was developing its own missile system called Flamingo, and that the Ukraine had a very effective, very quick, and very financially economic means of producing them in bulk en masse very, very quickly. We fast forward to today, and the Secretary of Ukraine's Parliamentary Defense Committee, Roman Kostenko, says we don't have any. We literally don't have any. Like this whole time where we've been saying we've been producing them and we're about to, this is going to be a massive game changer. Actually, nothing happened. It was pure illusion. Number two, I think this is, I mean, even more egregious than the all of the tank shipments that did nothing was from day one of the proxy war, Zelensky and his minions were begging for F-16s. We were told that this was going to change the dynamics of the war. You can find articles in the mainstream media from early on in the proxy conflict where there are, officials in Kiev saying, well, we basically destroyed the entire Russian Air Force. Give us the F-16s and we can finish the job on the war. The Ukraine finally got F-16s. I believe it was the start of last year. And where are they now? We don't hear anything about them. They've had zero impact on the battleground whatsoever. They have not helped Ukraine in any serious way. And there have been numerous quote unquote accidents that might have just been shoot downs or sabotage by Russian forces that have destroyed the F-16s. And these are planes which are very expensive to replenish and rebuild. So it's just, as I mentioned in the introduction, the farce just rolls on. Like, it's gotten to the point now where, yes, stuff is seemingly, material and weapons are seemingly offered to Ukraine, just even in rhetorical terms, just to get a headline for a day, to convince people that Ukraine is still in with a shot, and that if only they get this particular thing or this particular weapon, they can prevail. And it's beyond the joke now. We have been talking about this for as long as the show's been going, and it just keeps happening.
Well, we have on screen now a contribution from show favorite Paul Mason. This is from back in May of 2023, and it shows again the intellectual bankruptcy of these people. Paul, pretty whilst in the middle of a spy frenzy, just says, just send F-16s now. F-16s will be game changers like Patriots, Leopards, Challengers, but on steroids. If you don't like this war and want it to just go away, ask your government to send a squadron of upgraded F-16s to Ukraine this summer. F-16s. Certainly, Paul was very excited about the F-16s and the game changers. Take a note, tweet though. That's from 2023. That's from the earliest days of the so-called Ukrainian counter-offensive into, or just before it started actually, into the Zaporozhye region. All of those game changers that Mason was ranting and raving about there in the Twitter farm, all were destroyed. Like the Leopards couldn't master, as it turns out, a Russian minefield. The Challenger was deployed once, and then the British asked the Ukrainians to stop deploying it because it kept getting destroyed and it would be bad for sales. The HIMARS was counteracted within about a year. The Russians had captured a launcher, had captured an intact missile, had basically worked out how to destroy it. So all of this shite that people like Mason come out with is complete nonsense, because let's just assume for a moment they deployed the Tomahawk to Ukraine. As we've already established, they don't have that many of them. So they would hit a few buildings inside Russia, claim a great victory, and then say, we're winning. But that doesn't get to the crux of things here about how this war's being fought on the Western side, which is that the Russians which is to completely destroy the fighting capacity of the NATO side, meaning mainly Ukrainian bodies and NATO equipment, to destroy all of that, to the point where either Zelensky or whoever is in charge in Kiev has to negotiate, which, by the way, they won't, or the Maidan regime collapses. The Western way, and I think principally the Bay and the American way, is to score a lot of PR successes, claim that they're winning, and ignore the realities on the battlefield completely, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, Will Shriver, who is an excellent analyst on this, and has just pretty consistently called this correctly. The proxy war before it even started. He has a great line about, if you can't win a real war, win an imaginary war, which is and we're still in that space now. Like, despite the realities being so unambiguous, it's, there's still this fantastical, magical thinking. If only this gets sent, if only Western powers did this, if only Ukraine was equipped with this particular weapon or missile or whatever, then things will change and they can win. And they're already winning, but this will really put them over the top. And I think that this kind of feeds neatly into a few days ago we got a very rare example of the British media publishing a dissenting opinion on the state of play in the proxy war, and this was courtesy of a veteran British military official. Field I almost want to vomit reading out his title, but I did it anyway. And he ineptly and unambiguously stated Ukraine cannot win the war with Russia and should negotiate peace terms as soon as possible. Okay, this is this is remarkably rare because, as we've discussed before in the show, the Britain is unique in the Western world for its political and media unanimity on Ukraine and the necessity of keeping this going on. Dissenting in maybe in a tepid way, people like Zara Sultana might, even though she still sees this as a battle between good and evil, might say, well, we should be aiming for peace here, even if her sympathies are very evident. Aside from maybe Peter Hitchens and the occasional unheard column, there is zero dissent or disagreement on the basic proposition that Ukraine's fighting this grand battle for civilization on our behalf, and we need to send them whatever they want and need to get the job done. This is someone who Lord Richards was what amongst the top brass of the British military, and was involved, led British forces in Afghanistan, which of course was a total disaster. He just he states over and over and over again, we have encouraged Ukraine to fight, but we've not given them the means to win. What he doesn't state, as should be clear from our discussion today, there's nothing that can be given, save for, I don't know, maybe a nuclear weapon, that might kind of tilt the scales in Kiev's favor. And he also states, well, look, even if we did give them, all of our remaining resources, which is not very much at all, they still probably couldn't win because of manpower issues. And there is another quite stunning admission from him in this interview, where he basically states that, well, look, Britain's not ready to go in because to Ukraine, because it's not an existential issue for us, right? This is a faraway land comprised of people of whom we know nothing. But yet Ukraine is an existential issue for the Russians, and they're going to keep cheating until their objectives are met. And it's just this is something that we people like you and I and indeed our viewers know very well. We understand it. It's spelled out in WikiLeaks diplomatic cables dating back decades that Ukraine is the reddest of red lines in terms of NATO membership and integration into the kind of Western fold from Russia's perspective, irrespective of who's in power, irrespective of a Russian's political persuasion. This is not something that is going to be tolerated. And then yet we've just kind of seemingly the Western mainstream has just seemingly forgotten about this. Britain does have economic, political, military interests in gobbling up Ukraine, but that's the kind of that's a very specific wing of the British establishment who has that perspective. From the average person's perspective, and indeed I think also based on this field marshal's comments, a significant component of Britain's defence establishment, actually, it's not worth fighting or dying for. And we've already expended, directly and indirectly, an enormous amount of blood and treasure in keeping this completely unwinnable quagmire going. Maybe it's best if we just step away. And I think that I'm under no illusions and have little optimism this will lead to a wider reconsideration of the folly of doing this and embedding the British embedding themselves so intimately in a very dangerous and indeed, yes, unwinnable situation, from a military perspective. But the fact that The Independent is featuring this perspective, it could be the harbinger of further illumination from other sources.
Well, nothing like this kind of interview would go ahead without it being approved at the highest level. Like, Lord Richards is one of the most senior military officers. In fact, he was one of the last, I think, to hold the rank of Field Marshal in the British Army. Most of the time, nobody carries that rank. It's mainly generals who are like Chief of the Defence Staff, or Air Vice Marshals or Admirals. So it's interesting that he's come out and he's given this interview. It plainly represents, because again, when somebody this senior, even a retired senior officer and member of the House of Lords, but I would say a serious member of the House of Lords who actually represents a body of opinion, which Richards plainly does, and he's talking for, I would say, his friends in the military hierarchy of Britain, who some of these people, they're not like Hamish de Bretton Gordon or Richard Kemp or any of the sort of clownish colonels that populate the opinion side of the Telegraph. Some of these guys are more quiet and more serious in their calculations and actually have an idea of the capabilities of the British military. And they know damn well, as Richards hints at in this, that not only is Britain not going to fight Russia, what's the subtext of that, which is hidden, is that they couldn't. Because when the senior officers are actually asked by the parliamentary committees what would happen in a war against the Russians, the answer is always the same, which is the British army would run out of ammunition in a week and would be destroyed within about a month, if they're lucky. Given that the Russians have churned through, again, depending upon which estimate you believe, anywhere between 600,000 to 1.8 million Ukrainians killed. That's, I'm not particularly good at maths, but given that the total capacity of the British Army is 80,000, that's a lot of British armies that have been wiped out in Ukraine. In fact, it's at least 10, maybe more. So the senior officers in the army especially, but I've also think maybe the Air Force perhaps less so, but certainly with the ground forces, they know they couldn't last a week or two against the Russians. And some of them, I think, are concerned that the more rabid and wild elements in the political sphere are getting carried away to the point where they might try and do something stupid. And given that the disaster that a full-blooded encounter with the Russians would be in Ukraine, and not only that, how damaging it would be to the perception of British power to have the British army completely destroyed on the Ukrainian battlefield, which is what it would be. the senior officers are maneuvering, I think, to create more opposition to this now, knowing, as they all will do, that the end is coming, that the Ukrainian forces are being destroyed. And then when that happens, there will be a shrill and hysterical call in the British political and media establishment, maybe led by people like Hamish de Bretton Gordon and various different MPs of Labour and Tory and Reform and Lib Dem persuasion. In fact, you can throw in the SNP as well, because they're all on board with this. They'll all scream and say Ukraine must be saved. And it seems like, to me, that the British senior officers are stepping forward to basically prepare the ground now to say, no, we can't do that, Prime Minister. And by the way, Prime Minister, we know what you were doing with the male models, and perhaps it's time he's resigned to spend more time supporting Arsenal, who we all know you don't actually like. But Kit, what do you reckon to that as an interpretation?
Absolutely, and I think that there have been a few examples of this within like the past year, as we've discussed, where until from January until May there was an enormous amount of talk about emanating from Starmer and Healy about how Britain was ready to shed blood for Ukraine if necessary, that Starmer was willing to commit troops to Kiev. This was about as popular as Starmer, which is to say, not at all. But not only that, we did have numerous examples of senior, current and former British military officials who stated very plainly and in a very robust way, this is complete insanity. We don't have the resources to do it, and it's not going to happen. Okay, so it's like, again, in the spirit of these things just constantly repeating, it's as if Starmer needs reminding that this is completely insane. And Field Marshal Lord, whatever his name is, has been given the opportunity to really drive this home, because it is a point that he makes over and over and over again in the interview. That there's nothing we can do about this. It's it's not agreeable from our perspective, but there's nothing we can do about it. And I think that sadly, we are led by people who really do need this spelled out to them, not only in the kind of spirit of Sesame Street with music and puppets, but they need it spelling out to them routinely, because as we started the show by saying, on a pretty much weekly basis, we get the same pledges, the same threats, the same strategies, if you can even call them, get trotted out, only for the people loudly tub thumping for this rubbish to take a step back. A perfect example is provided by the recent flurry and then sudden death via wet farts of the prospect of yet again giving Ukraine frozen or stolen Russian assets to assist Ukraine. So, over the past week, or the past 2 weeks, there's been a lot of chatter about how EU leaders are on the verge of agreeing to finally repurpose assets taken from Russia for Ukraine's purposes. There have been talks about using this money to buy Ukraine fighter jets. There's been talk about using this money for Ukrainian reconstruction, or just to pay state salaries. They're so bankrupt and broken at this point. I mean, that's all about all their that's what they're dependent on to keep their lights on, which they can't even do without the help of McDonald's and generators. But the after all of this chatter and all of these cast iron pledges that we're going to give Ukraine this money, EU leaders have yet again stepped back from this. They've yet again got cold feet. After all of this rhetoric, all of this yes, like fantastical scheming about how we're going to get this money and how it's going to be spent. EU member state leaders, in a very rare example of them demonstrating any autonomy or independence of thought whatsoever, the head Meloni in Italy and the Belgian Prime Minister, whose name escapes me, and I don't feel particularly ashamed about that. They both said this is going to be suicidal if we do it, and this has been the consistent line taken by Euroclear, which is the Belgian kind of payment processor and the financial infrastructure which is holding the Russian funds. They have consistently said, do this and it will be suicidal. I have reported on leaked documents related to Project Alchemy, this British Ministry of Defence created military intelligence cell, which has been pushing Britain's war effort, proxy war effort, since the very start of this. In a document authored in February 2022, which is to say, more than 3.5 years ago, at the very, very start of this, they warned that, well, the seizure of Russian assets and cutting Russia out of SWIFT will be the end of SWIFT, right? They knew that this would happen, right? So, and yet, EU leaders still have not given up on this completely suicidal, idiotic stratagem. And yet they, at a second they kind of appear to be on the verge of implementing it, they step back. And I'm sure in a few weeks' time we'll get the same story. The same story will play out again.
Yes, and it relates to the recent Nexperia nationalization by the Netherlands government as well, because the reason why they won't do this, reason why they're dithering over doing this, is because the business side of things is very worried that this, coming on the heels of the Dutch government essentially taking over a Chinese company for no other reason than that the Chinese had won their chip war, that the US and the Europeans started. This is now having a severe impact upon the business in Europe, that if they stole these Russian assets outright, then that would further impact upon the willingness of other areas of the world to invest inside the EU. And therefore, you've got basically a split on what the hell they want to do. Some of them want to go right ahead and take these assets and give them to the Ukrainians, and I'm sure that Andrei Yermak would use it to buy another villa in Miami or somewhere. But others, maybe being a bit more far-sighted, and including, by the way, Belgian Prime Minister's name is Bart de Wever, just in case there's any fans of Belgian politics out there. But the reason why he would be concerned was because Belgium is the home to the SWIFT system, and they make a good deal of money by being based there. And some of these guys don't want to lose all the business as a result of the Ukraine war. Others, like I suspect the Germans, are more fundamentalist about the issue. I mean, we could probably do an entire episode on German imperialism and its strange relationship to the United States. But there are those in Germany who do see the future for Germany in the same way that the Kaiser did, and the same way that the failed Austrian watercolor artist did, which is that Germany must dominate the central and east of Europe and the west of what was once the Soviet Union. So some of them are very keen on continuing the war at all costs as well, but others aren't, which is why now they're dithering and split over the way forward. And what this tells us is that Europe is politically split, and there is a developing crisis, as can be seen in German industry. Because coming on the heels of the Nexperia battle, we've now got this report in the Irish Times outlining that Volkswagen is now staggering into a crisis amid a drastic shortfall of chip supplies, meaning that some of its major car lines will be suspended from production, with tens of thousands of jobs now at risk in what is still the principal and prestige employer in Germany. And it was Angela Merkel's almost not entire strategy, but one of the biggest parts of the strategy was to back Volkswagen at all costs and keep it selling cars at high volumes. Now this is falling to pieces, and all Friedrich Merz has got to say is maybe some more missiles for Ukraine. But this is the ongoing saga of the decline and fall of the EU, Kit, is it not?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like, I mean, heavy is the burden of consistently being proven right. But, we discussed this on last week's show. I think that everything that we said on it stands up very strongly. And indeed, it's incredible how rapidly we were proven right on the unfeasibility of the Gaza ceasefire, but also the implications of the state seizure of Nexperia. Nexperia was a Dutch-based company which was run by the Chinese but employed a lot of locals. And due to US sanctions, which are designed to try and cripple China's ability to procure and make microchips, which has just failed miserably. Because the Dutch government was scared of falling foul of the Americans, they initiated, the effective seizure of Nexperia. Nexperia was a major supplier of chips to a vast number of companies, including, the last remaining vestiges of serious European industry in the car sector. And now Volvo and Volkswagen are on the risk of having factories shut down due to disruption to chip supplies caused by Nexperia's for seizure by Dutch authorities. And it's just like, that we live in this very strange time where European leaders are being constantly confronted with their vassalage under US power, with their impotence, their inability to agree on anything politically, their inability to make any headway on any promises they make to Ukraine, or just more generally on foreign policy or military and security policy. But they still seemingly have these delusions of grandeur, and they are willing to undertake very risky and self-harmful actions for short-term gain, even if that short-term gain is, the US isn't pissed off with us for 10 minutes. It is harry-carry on a continental scale playing out almost every week.
Yes, and ultimately won't do anything to actually address any of the real problems facing the European countries. It'll only speed up the decline and ultimately fall of the European Union. Now, just before we go any further, should we? We got Blaine at 6 o'clock your time.
Yes.
Which gives us about half an hour, doesn't it?
Yeah. So, what do you want to do?
Should we you finish on the Venezuela and hemispheric readjustment story and put the other two into this week?
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay, right. So then, as Europe declines and falls, as does the reach of the American part of the Anglo-American Empire. And this leads to them taking some very interesting decisions, including the increasing number of threats made to, just about anybody, count the targets. But more recently, it is, of course, the case that the Trump administration has been making loud threats and carrying out essentially murders of Venezuelan and Colombian fishermen, it seems, in the Caribbean. Trump has, of course, following on, it must be said, from Biden and Obama, carried on the long war against the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, and in its attempt to stop the long process of socialist transformation there. Trump has added to that list recently by denouncing Gustavo Petro, the president of Colombia. But as the recent headline in the Orinoco Tribune tells us, these threats to the Venezuelan and Colombian sovereignty might end up actually pushing these two neighbors together in such a way that hasn't been seen before, and furthering and, shall we say, deepening relations between Petro and Maduro, who previously had been on rather mixed terms. Now, what has happened over the course of the past few weeks is, of course, that the U.S. has made a series of threats and veiled and otherwise moved a series of naval assets and into the region around Venezuela, and recently flew high-altitude bombers up to the border of Venezuela and back again. This all coming on the heels of Trump accusing the Venezuelan government of being a narco-trafficking state, which, if you've watched our very excellent interview with Aaron Good, which I recommend that you all go and check out, you'll know how much of a laugh that is, given that the narcotics smuggling and dealing is so crucial to the US state itself and to Wall Street, of course. But all of this is essentially a symptom of the decline of the US empire, and that it is attempting in a flailing and desperate manner to reassert control over what it regards as its hemisphere. So you see more sanctions on Cuba, more sanctions being passed against Nicaragua, and various threats being made against Venezuela. This includes, of course, the propaganda war, giving Maria Machado the Nobel Peace Prize, which makes that prize into even more of a joke than it was already. She then promptly went on Don Jr.'s podcast, which was really scraping the barrel there. Couldn't even get her on Rogan, where she declared that she would privatize the entire Venezuelan oil industry and essentially make the country into a vassal state. And that would be a very good deal for the USA. We talk about discrediting yourself even more than Juan Guaido. Kip, the decline of the US is an interesting thing to observe, is it not? As the Colossus flails away, it seeks to cushion its fall by landing upon the Monroe Treaty, the Monroe Doctrine.
Indeed. Well, it was the now thankfully dead Michael Ledeen, the neoconservative who was a key architect of the US's various self-destructive wars in the Middle East following 9/11, who said, every decade, every 3 years or every decade, the US has to throw some small country against the wall to show that we mean business. And it does seem very much that the US has decided that Venezuela is the soft option. The US having failed to crush Yemen twice in the span of just a year, the US having failed in its war supporting Israel against Iran over the span of 12 days. What was originally intended to, destroy the Islamic Republic and trigger regime change actually just led to the US expending vast amounts of extremely expensive munitions, which will take up to 8 years to replenish. A recurring theme, not only in this episode, but on our show. Lack of industrial capacity, take notes, CIA and MI6 people listening to this broadcast. And it's like, they are quite clearly gearing up for war with Venezuela, or at least trying to look tough against Venezuela, despite the fact that they are battling this total imaginary specter of Venezuela being this international hub for drug trafficking. And you've got to bear in mind that during Trump's first term, there was a very bizarre wanted alive or dead bounty put out for Maduro, where they claimed that he was this drug kingpin on a par with Pablo Escobar. And this seems to have inspired the Bay of Piglets, which was that very, very bizarre and embarrassingly failed attempted invasion of Venezuela by Silvercore USA, which is this kind of private mercenary firm, and a bunch of Venezuelan fishermen captured them and paraded them around on TV for our delectation. There is a disturbing CNN report, and bear in mind that CNN is, basically run by the CIA at this point, and most of their expert commentators are former military and security and intelligence professionals. They ran this article daring to suggest that fears of increased sanctions on Venezuela are of greater concern to the public than US military action. Which doesn't seem very believable, and it contains all of these quotes from nameless or pseudonymous Venezuelans saying, "Oh, please bomb our country, but just let us live in peace, and let us import toilet paper and bananas again." Again, it's farce. It's total farce. That doesn't mean to say that the US might not do something incredibly stupid. And attempt to invade Venezuela or try and flood the country with paramilitaries, which that's something that they're very good at doing, and it means that their hands remain relatively clean in the scheme of things. But again, sleepwalking into disaster, as we've discussed on the show. There in Venezuela, there is a very well-equipped, very well-trained, and thoroughly prepared civilian defense force who are willing to put their lives on the line to defend Chavez's legacy, to defend the legitimately elected President Maduro. This could, if they are stupid and foolhardy enough to actually kickstart a proper war with Venezuela, then this could be an Iraq-style quagmire. It's rather forgotten, even though it wasn't that long ago, what a disaster for the US the Iraq War was. And this is the US media, the Western media didn't go near the fact that there was a very well-armed, very effective kind of counter as well insurgency against the US occupation, which killed and maimed an enormous amount of US soldiers. And this would be stepping into an environment where you have an adversary in the form of pro-government paramilitary forces who are much better organized than the Iraqi resistance was at the time, 20 years ago. So, popcorn at the ready for if they're stupid enough to do this. I might add as well that there is like a bizarre, call it a contradiction, or a paradox at the core of this, which is, the US is very, very aggressively ramping up the rhetoric against Venezuela, and doing things like just killing Venezuelan fishermen, and is giving every appearance of wanting to get embroiled in a fight with Venezuela. And then yet on other fronts, the US seems to be pulling back, like Marco Rubio, that notorious lunatic hawk who is very supportive of attacking Venezuela. He's telling the Israelis, don't get involved in the West Bank. He's all there are other similar noises being made by Trump administration officials, including Trump himself, which shows that actually, when push comes to shove, the US is not down and not ready for major military confrontations anywhere else. So quite why they think Venezuela is going to be the soft target is anyone's guess. Maybe they're just getting fed incredibly crap intelligence on what they're stepping into. That is an option.
Yeah, well, that actually takes us neatly back in the manner of all these things to the point where we started at, which is the Institute for the Study of War and things like them. And the think tank world is supposed to provide the decision makers in Washington and London with accurate information. But it would seem that somewhere along the line, the decision makers became propagandized themselves. They started to believe the things that they used to tell the proles out there to believe about the immortality of the American empire, about Britain ruling the waves, about the Western civilization always prevailing. The people in Congress and Parliament started to believe the nonsense, and the think tanks started to feed them more nonsense. So this reaches the point where it's left to like military men like Lord Richards and others to point out to the morons in Downing Street in Washington, D.C. that no, Mr. President or Mr. Prime Minister, that's not possible for us to do. Now, the formal strength of the actual like U.S. Army is less than 500,000 strong. That's spread out over what? Over 100 countries in the world, with the bulk of it in Europe and West Asia, with spread out elsewhere as well. They have no capacity or very limited capacity to replace any ships that go down. Their entire model of making war is based on the idea that they will never sustain serious casualties because they can't replace the men or the equipment. Now, so what? They're going to walk into Venezuela with what? 2,000 to 3,000 US Marines? Now, even I can tell you that that's probably not enough, given that Venezuela can mobilize like hundreds of thousands in terms of professional military and reservists, and then millions in terms of working class militia members who are trained to defend their particular neighborhood. Then you're going to walk into a situation where it'll be worse than the Iraq War, a degree of magnitude's worse. Also, Maduro openly says that they've got, and I believe him, Russian surface-to-air missiles that have been provided to them. And we don't know, they may also have stuff from the Chinese, I don't know, but they've definitely got a military partnership with the Russians. So the Russians will have been sharing with them all kinds of stuff to counter the US, meaning the US could lose some serious air power if it does try to bomb Venezuela. So the question is, well, is Trump prepared to preside over a devastating loss? And is he prepared to suck up the political consequences of that? My guess is no. My guess is that all of this garbage they're coming out with and all of the killing of random fishermen in the Caribbean is all designed to try and provoke some internal split within the Venezuelan state, to try and motivate some general to defect or some politician to lead a coup or some new Juan Guaido to emerge. None of it will work because that job isn't particularly well fancied in Venezuela now. You're putting yourself on the same side as Trump. Most Venezuelans will roundly reject you. So this will be, if they do try it, it'll be a disaster. My guess is, though, they'll shout and scream and jump up and down and then quietly move on to something else that's more manageable. Maybe they'll try and re-invade Haiti again. Who knows? But what it does reveal is just how hollow and empty the empire's actual abilities are these days. That it all comes down to threats, blustering, and if there's the slightest chance of actually getting shot at, then the idea goes away very quickly. Kit, did you want to come in with anything to conclude on this?
I think we've had 3.5 years, or more, ever since February 2022, of the West being given unambiguous and blunt force lessons in the limits of their economic, political, and military power. And as we have reiterated throughout this broadcast, those lessons still keep not getting learned. So don't put anything past these people, because it is entirely plausible that, out of sheer desperation, out of a desperate need to swagger and flash off their supposed testicular fortitude, that the US could do something incredibly stupid, like invade Venezuela with a token force, which then gets beaten back. I might add that we've just had the anniversary of the US getting its behind pretty comprehensively handed to it, but by the Lebanese resistance, when the US under Reagan thought, oh well, we're just going to invade Lebanon and we're going to solve the problems there, and then hundreds of US soldiers got killed and they ran away. Now, on this that you have on screen now, a very interesting piece by the now independent journalist Ada Chavez, which states that sources, quite who they are, we're not sure, say that the CIA is thinking about shutting down its China center due to its ineffectiveness, having consumed vast resources with little to show for it. Because, of course, in 2010, the Chinese they identified a sizable local network of collaborators and informants. They got wiped out pretty brutally. And ever since then, the US has really struggled to gather any serious intelligence on Beijing whatsoever. There have been calls for setting up a CIA center in Taiwan, or there were calls to do so in Hong Kong before the Chinese stepped in there to make sure it didn't happen. And despite all of these failures, and I can't agree with the overall thesis that some geopolitical analysts subscribe to, which is that Trump is completely reorientating away from China and the US likewise, because every single week we have seemingly we have congressional meetings where US lawmakers talk about the fact that China is the US public enemy numero uno, and something needs to be done about them. We've had the coup in Nepal and other upheaval in countries surrounding China, and indeed Chinese allies like Indonesia, where the fingerprints of NED and other US intelligence cutouts are plastered all over the unrest. It's quite clear that they've not given up on their fantasy of somehow beating China, or somehow demonstrating that they are the US is the leading power in the world still. No, I mean, the reality is that the US is on its way down. It's not going to go out quietly. It will go out flailing. It will probably cause a lot of misery for a lot of people. But this notion of global domination, and indeed, as I mentioned earlier, this new American century, it's not happening. It's finished. It's over. And it would be a crying shame if Venezuela was, in one way or another, a victim of that kind of late stage imperial quest for dominance and exerting dominance. But that said, there's always the prospect that it could be a Suez moment. So a potential silver lining, if there's one to be had.
Yes, indeed. And if there is another silver lining, I would suggest that if the renewed brotherly nature of the relations Colombia and Venezuela continue, then Bolivar's plan of a Gran Colombia might not be too far away after all. Now that leads us to the end of this week's edition of Decline and Fall. This is your weekend edition. We hope that we can be a better accompaniment to your weekend than any of the Sunday papers. Certainly we're a good deal more accurate and a good deal more entertaining as well. So be sure to look out for coming specials. Again, more stuff coming up on the 30th anniversary of the Dayton Accords, so keep an eye out for that one. But until next week, it's goodbye from me in an undisclosed location in Glasgow.
And it's goodbye from me in an undisclosed location in the former and future Yugoslavia. God bless you guys. Thank you so much for joining us. We hope you've enjoyed it. Like, share, subscribe. If you're feeling super generous, drop us a donation. But we're happy with you telling your family and friends in lieu. So see you soon.
Bye-bye.